Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Nemtin. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I learned something new, actually. I'm gonna change my land acknowledgement because the day before yesterday I was in Oshawa, and I learned that it's not just Anishinaabe, it's actually Michi-Sagin Anishinaabe territory, which is the area all around the Southern Great Lakes. It means the territory of the largemouth rivers. I think, is that right? I'm only 48 hours into integrating this information. So
can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, that's close enough. Yeah, Michi-Sagin means people at the mouth of the river.
People of the mouth of the river. And so as we're so close to the mouth of the Don River, and I actually live on very close to Vaughan Road, which I know was a really important river for spawning and fishing that's now Bathurst. It just makes me, I wanted to bring that into my land acknowledgement to sort of bring in our relationship to the land in a way that I haven't before. So thank you for that help, integrating that. Such a beautiful visual when you think of a largemouth. The mouth of a river is such a beautiful thing. It's a sort of tributary, especially if it's the fresh water and the ocean connecting. They're supposed to be some of the most fertile areas. And so I'm pleased to be here with all of you on the traditional territories of Mississaugas, of the Michi-Sagin, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and I'm missing one that I often remember, Chippewa. Thank you. Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and so many nations, including Métis and Inuit folks. This panel, I'm so excited to welcome you to the Equity and Diversity Key to Innovation and Systemic Design panel. This panel is part of Social Innovation Canada's goal of actually starting to try and demonstrate equitable approaches to social innovation. And we have such an amazing group of folks here. I'm really glad that this is being recorded so that we can have it for a while to go, because there's some really amazing experiences and so much expertise at this table. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the panel, and then I'm going to introduce everyone. First, I'm going to say that I'm really sorry that Gabe Oatley from Future of Good is not here. They were going to be moderating this panel, and I will not be able to live up to their capacity, but we will do our best to try and represent. They're unfortunately not feeling well, and we hope that they're feeling better really soon. So in today's rapidly evolving world, it's clear that achieving meaningful change is going to require social innovation and innovation. And it's also clear that the way that we do social innovation and innovation needs to change for that to actually have the kind of outcomes that we want it to produce, which is a more equitable, prosperous future for everyone. And so this is sort of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to start letting these folks talk about this a little bit. So Luke Anderson, Executive Director of Stopgap Foundation, is on my far right, and welcome, Luke. Luke is an advocate for accessibility. He's the founder of Stopgap Foundation, and he became that after a spinal cord injury in 2002, which exposed the challenges faced by wheelchair users. And this is something we don't think about, but I've had some experience with this, and it's really quite remarkable how few places people in wheelchairs can enter into in a dignified manner, because we just don't see it. I remember this with the Abilities Arts Festival, that we had these amazing artists and dancers, and it was so difficult to even just get on the stage. And so this is part of our built environment that needs to have a holistic, right here is pretty good, but still not even perfect. And so Luke has this incredible approach where his mission is to create a barrier-free and inclusive society by working with community leaders across Canada. He's a licensed professional engineer and is known for the iconic brightly painted ramps that adorn communities nationwide. Wow, okay. So look for those ramps and think of Luke. To his left, take a little breath here. I've been practicing this one as well, but I won't do it. Karonhiowanen, Barberstock, Okwaho, who works at Okwaho Equal Source. Not terrible, but not perfect. No, it's all right. You don't know. Rye is a Kaneka scholar and researcher of Dish with One Spoon, One Belt Treaty Territory. He conducts Lower Great Lakes Indigenous Peoples governance, economic, and treaty relations research. In addition, he offers Indigenous relations consulting and project management services in social impact fields of First Nation economic relations, sustainability, and community building. Rye has a background as a senior management in senior management, including work with Six Nations of the Grand River, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Oneida Nation of the Thames. And I've been hearing about Rye from my friend Joe for a very long time, and I'm really excited to meet him today. So welcome, Rye. To Rye's right is my dear friend, Maryam. And Maryam is a senior fellow with SI Canada and the founding director, Social Innovation Labs, a doctoral researcher currently doing her PhD in record time at the University of Waterloo. She's an amazing change maker that has roots in sort of legal profession, in all over the world, in social enterprise, in social innovation. She's a gifted facilitator. Her work focuses on decolonizing social innovation and entrepreneurship by exploring alternate ways of knowing, doing, and being. So, welcome. And Mathura Temwa Mahendren, did I say that? Yeah, is the author of Dismantling the Master's Tools. And I first connected with Mathura when we were supporting, in a small way, the creation of this most remarkable podcast that I encourage you all to find on Spotify. It's Dismantling the Master's Toolkit. And I've listened to it, and it's found its way into my body. It's one of the most beautiful podcasts I've listened to, and very, very impactful. And so I really encourage you all. Mathura is a researcher by nature. Her practice is rooted in a commitment to designing and sharing tools, frameworks, and brave spaces that can hold individuals, groups, and relationships through difference, discomfort, grief, change, and ultimately growth. And I've been in places where Mathura has held this space, which is a very difficult space to be in. And I've been very grateful to have had those experiences. Given that our ability to navigate these experiences is intertwined with how deeply we're taught to love, love is both the method and the madness that underpins her bodies of work. Lovely. Thank you. So I just want to say, so Luke, Rye, Maryam, Mathura, welcome. We're so pleased to have you here on this panel. And thank you to everyone who brought us here today. Thank you to OCAD. Thank you to Cheryl. Thank you to my team and the many folks that have worked so hard. So we're going to start by asking each of you to share a personal anecdote or story that highlighted the profound impact of centering equity and diversity has had on the communities that you work with or the projects that you've been involved with. And I'm wondering how your personal journey influenced your approach to your work. We can either go back, forth, popcorn.
Want me to kick it off? Okay. All right. Thanks for that intro. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I have a story. Begins around this time in 2002 when I crashed on my mountain bike and I sustained a high-level spinal cord injury. So all of a sudden, my life completely changed. I was all of a sudden introduced to a world that's really not well suited for somebody that uses a wheelchair. And over time, I began to learn how to navigate my world in my new physical situation. And that's what really led me to the work that I'm doing today with Stopgap. You know, raising awareness and building these brightly painted ramps for locations with a single stepped entryway to draw attention to the issue. And when we began this project, again, around this time of year in 2011 in the Junction neighborhood, we had a really, really hard time getting those first 13 business owners interested in participating. A lot of those business owners said that they didn't want a ramp because they didn't have any customers that used wheelchairs. So it was difficult to stew in those responses and sort of watch and witness these business owners flail in their own ignorance. So naturally, I had to deal with my frustration and anger that came up in me when I was hearing these business owners respond that way. And I think what I'm trying to say here is, you know, I had to dig into my own experience because all of the things that we were trying to do at that time, spreading awareness and get people to a heightened level of understanding about the importance of accessibility and inclusion, you know, all of that stuff was the farthest thing off of my radar before my injury. So I had to meet these people where they were at on their journey of understanding and really convert that frustration and anger into an understanding that, oh, right, they just don't know. And I think that really is a foundational element in the work that we're doing, meeting people where they're at in this learning continuum, and working with them regardless of where they're at. Yeah. So personal story turned into like a really foundational element of the work that we do and how we engage with this broad range of organizations and communities, from kindergarten kids to corporate executives.
Thank you. Yeah, that sort of, when you start speaking, it made me think of sort of what we ended off with Mathura's introduction, that it requires a lot of love to kind of get through that anger and that frustration and to have that kind of empathy for folks that are, for the ignorance. Yeah. Thank you, Rai. Who would like to go next?
So I'm going to throw a little curveball in. I come from matrilineal society, so it's the women that hold voice and have vision. So it's up to one of you two.
Thank you. We're going to go Maryam, Mathura.
Also coming from a family of brilliant rock star matriarchs. We used to joke about how our dad might be the head of the family, but our mom is the neck that turns the head. It was always her you would have to ask for stuff. To be in the skin that I'm in, there's no choice but to center this. It is the experience of the skin to center what it knows, what it embodies, what it experiences every day. And yet, supremacist, white supremacist, colonial cultures are so deeply part of the, you could say they're in the water, but now it's so difficult to differentiate the water from what's in the water. It's like microplastics, they're everywhere, right? So even as a woman who was born and raised in Karachi by these phenomenal matriarchs, I was still schooled in Western colonial ways. I went to law school, not just in Pakistan, but in the US, and one of the top 10 law schools in the world. And I thought I was so cool, right? And then I went back to Pakistan, and somehow at the crossroads of switching careers and choosing between human rights law and social innovation, found myself in the mountains of the northern Pakistan, where the Hindu Kush, the Karakoram, and the Himalayas all meet. And these are like three of the largest mountain ranges in the world. And here they meet in this one glorious place. And there are indigenous communities that have been there for thousands of years. And one of the first stories they tell me is, and it's so funny because they say it so lightly, right? They're like, oh yeah, we've been growing glaciers. And I'm like, what? How do you grow a glacier? And they say, for hundreds of years, in the spring, our men, we go up and we put a layer of rock and ice and soil, and then rock and ice and soil, and rock and ice and soil, and we keep layering it. And so what happens is, as summer comes, it's a very nice filtration mechanism. So we get clean water into our homes. But then it's a drip effect. So it's that the layers also hold on to the water. And so by the time winter comes around, there's almost like this incremental increase in the length of the glacier. And that's what living with land looks like. And all of a sudden, everything I had learned in law school meant nothing. I had been called there to teach these people human-centered design. And I was like, oh shit, what am I doing here? And what I was doing there was basically unlearning and really facing myself again, facing what my body knows to be true again, facing all the things I didn't learn in school, but learned from my grandmothers again. There in Pakistan, we've had crazy floods, like the kind of floods that displace 1/3 of the population. And the population is 220 million people. That's 6 times the size of this country. And yet in that one spot, the glaciers have not been melting. A friend who did their grad studies at MIT was like, oh, it's called the Karakoram anomaly, and no one knows why. And I was like, I don't know, maybe to ask those people there, maybe they know why. But that's why we need to center it, particularly in design and systemic design.
Thanks for the stories, friend. Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you. I said thanks for the stories, friend. I think for me, equity means not giving everyone the same thing, but giving everyone what they need. And that's to look at everyone as a unique, everyone and everything as a unique situation with a unique context while holding the things that unite us. And I think one of my beliefs is that we can't practice in the world and with other people what we don't practice within ourselves. And I think that the question of how do we practice equity in our bodies and how do we practice valuing and centering diversity in our bodies starts with acknowledging that we are not just brains sitting in this space. We are bodies, we are emotions, we are ancestry, we are spirits. And if I am asking myself that question of how do I center equity in my body and in my spirit and in my emotions, that would require acknowledging that we are coming, I am coming, speaking for myself, off of a week and also a lifetime and also generations and also 75 years plus. And it requires naming that and giving that space and acknowledging the ways in which apartheid is very real right now, both in the world and in my body. It requires acknowledging the ways occupation is a reality, both an ocean away and on this very land. It requires acknowledging that I needed to be horizontal and on the floor for 3 hours yesterday to be able to sit upright today, because that is the work of grief. And it would require acknowledging that what my spirit wants in this moment is to offer you a song, a mantra, that my grandmother used to sing to us, for us actually at 5 a.m. every morning. At the crack of dawn, you would hear her before you saw the sunlight come into your room. And it was her way of offering us protection for the day. And she would do it every day, so it truly was for the day. Just so you know, for me, it's Abama's mantra. It does have a formal name with many other connotations, but for me, it is a protection passed on from my grandmother and one that I offered to you with that intention and offer to us as a space. I would invite you to close your eyes, or if you need someone to look at, feel free to look at me, but just to offer others kind of the space and the privacy of having their own experience. So I'll sing it 3 times and just allowing yourself to feel for whatever comes up through your body and through your spirit. I'm also coming off of a cold, so if I screech, that's why. Bargo devasya dhimahi dhyo yo na prachodayam. Om Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bargo devasya dhimahi dhyo yo na prachodayam. Om Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bargo devasya dhimahi dhyo yo na prachodayam.
Thank you. Very much. So heartbroken that your family and ancestors need that song to protect themselves from folks that are in my ancestry. I'm so heartbroken that we continue to look to violence. Assault things. Thank you. What a gift that song was. So, next question is around asking Rai. Oh, Rai, oh my goodness. I was going to say, is it around Rai talking to us about legal frameworks? And I don't think that's quite where I want to go. And so I'm glad that you
Me
can
either.
instead change to some storytelling, Rai. Thank you.
Sure. So Sego Sewa Kwego means hi, how are you? Do you come with the good peace? That's been something that's been a part of this land for hundreds and potentially thousands of years, my ancestors coming together and asking those questions. Genuine curiosity and care was one of the motivations to ask those. So as a little boy growing up on a reserve, and we still have Indian reserves here in Canada, I got the honor and privilege of spending time with my grandmothers as well. And one of the interesting things, one day I was out and I was doing some work on the flower garden. I had taken my socks and shoes off and I had my feet in the dirt. And my grandmother looked at my footprint. She said, "You got flat feet." She said, "Yep, you're definitely an Indian." And I kind of looked at my grandmother and like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Our people genetically have flat feet. The reason why is so that we can feel Mother Earth and that we're always reminded of her and she's reminded of us. Walk gently on her, take care of her. You have a responsibility now as an Ungwe, as an original person. Please be mindful in everything that you do moving forward that you are to represent. Speak with her, not for her, as a Mohawk man." So I really took that into consideration as a little guy. And as I progressed, I started learning more about our history and our culture, our identity. And one of the things which I always found was so profound, especially in the work that I do now in innovation, is really looking at the seeds of curiosity of our people and what they were actually developing, concepts of innovation hundreds and thousands of years ago. And I actually have an example. It's the Gaswanta. I'm sure some of you may have seen the Gaswanta. We also call it the two-row wampum. The two-row wampum came into fruition, came into its own in 1613 between my ancestors, the Haudenosaunee people, and the Dutch. These two parallel lines. One is the canoe of my people, the one is the wooden ship. Side by side on the river of life, this wampum represents the river of life, a life system. And what's beautiful about this is that the whole concept developed in 1613 was an innovation that we recognize today as, in math, what is this? It's an equal sign. So my ancestors were thinking about equity, equality, diversity, and common unity back in those days. And it still continues in the spirit of our people today. It's that sense of common unity, understanding that seed of knowledge. That's what actually develops that social component. The social component, what my grandmother always said, comes from ecology, comes from the voice, the spirit of the land. She speaks to us. She speaks to us in a way that for some, our eyes and ears are closed. For whatever reason, we'll call it colonization as being one of the main culprits. But one of the things I can say is if you ever go out to the forest, and usually it's people who'll say, "I'm going on vacation, I'm going to Algonquin Park." A lot of people from Toronto will do that. They go up to Algonquin Park. They come back from Algonquin Park and they say, "I feel so refreshed. I feel so alive. My stress that time I was there is completely gone." That was innovation. That was nature at work, healing through the bottom of your feet because you were reconnecting with something greater than yourself. That's what my grandmother always said. Connect with something greater than yourself. Then you'll be a humble human being. Then you'll have your eyes and ears open to the world around you to generate those changes that need to occur to help improve quality and conditions of life, not just for people, but for the land that defines the people. So putting this into consideration, always looking at that seed of curiosity. We always speak of roots, the roots of knowledge. Well, you have to have a seed in order to generate a root. And when we're talking about social innovation, equity, diversity, inclusion, and common unity, and if you put common unity together, you get community. That's really where I believe, for me and the work that I do, is really focusing on what does that truly mean to people, but not only to the people, the land, the water, the resources that sustain us all. That has a decision-making power as well when it comes to decisions of social innovation, for example. All that coming from my grandmother asking me and joking around with my flat feet. And that was, I hate to say it, 30 plus years ago. So I'm kind of dating myself a little bit. I am a child of the 70s. But what I can say is that we have some great, brilliant minds, but it's also heart that goes into innovation. And that's where I really do believe we need to really kind of center ourselves as really feeling what innovation is rather than always thinking about it. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and you can kind of feel, if you let yourself, when it's going sideways. I've been in rooms when it's starting to go sideways and you can just feel there's some friction here. Sometimes the tension is because you're about to make a breakthrough, and sometimes the tension is because you're heading in the wrong direction. And so I think it's really important to sort of check yourself when you start to feel that. Thank you. Thank you so much. So applying approaches that incorporate diverse knowledge and lived experience, incorporating these lessons from our grandparents, from our grandmothers, from the trees, from the oceans, from the, from all of the things that are around us that are actually systems when we're thinking about systems thinking. Maryam, I've been in situations with you and I continue on shifting from things like, an example is the house to a home when we're working around specific issues, or just when we're creating a team of people working together. In the context of innovation, do you want to give us some examples of how you've used design thinking to identify and address systemic biases, barriers that hinder equitable outcomes?
So when I first encountered design thinking, it was through, and it might be probably true for most people here, IDEO, which is a big firm out of like the Silicon Valley. And I was taught design thinking as, all these things, empathy and step into the shoes of the other and go and, remove your expert hat and like. And then a part of me, which used to do interfaith work, was like, where have I read this before? And I had read it in the Quran. I had read it in the Torah. I had read it in Lao Tzu. I had read it in the Bible. And I had read it in indigenous faith traditions. And I was like, hold on a second. How are these guys saying this is something new? And then packaging it and selling it for like all these thousands of dollars. Oh my goodness. But then adding insult to injury, calling it human-centered design. Wow. And I knew something was wrong, right? But then I still thought, no, maybe they don't know. Maybe they haven't read this stuff, right? And so I went to someone who was working for IDEO, and I was like, we should write a paper, because how I'm teaching HCD? I have all this scripture and I have all these stories. Rabindranath Tagore, who's like a big literary figure in South Asia, I'm using his work. I'm using Mullah Nasruddin comics. That's how I'm teaching HCD. Do you guys want to work together? And I get told that I could sell ice to Eskimos. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. And yeah, I know I talk well, that's law school. But nothing. It didn't go anywhere. They were like, we have very specific funding for very specific things. We're doing okay, all right. And so at some point I was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore, especially after Hunza, right? Especially after, gosh, what the Hunza population was doing in terms of design in the mountains, with the people, with the land, with, gosh, everything. We stopped teaching human-centered design. We just thought, okay, let's switch over to design thinking as a generic term. Let's, yes, give people the tools, because, you know, others they're going to meet, they're going to need to know the lingo, and so we stuck to some of the lingo. But over time, it became about, what is the land teaching us? And so the lands that I was working on, Punjab, one of the true mystics of that land, an Islamic Sufi poet, Bulle Shah, was telling us, "Par ilm te fazil hoye, te kabhi apne aap nu padhya nahi." You know, you read all these books and you think you're some, you know, super educated person, but you've never taken the time to read yourself. And then he went on, and, you know, he gave all these examples. And then he says, Bulle Shah asmanu urdya phiro hai, te jehda ghar baitha onu padhya hai nahi. You keep looking into the skies for signs of something, but the one you're looking for has been in your heart always. And so one of the things that led me to think about, so Bulle Shah, but also another really brilliant mystic poet from Punjab, Shah Hussain. When you read their work in conjunction, Shah Hussain says, "Hor vi niva ho," bow down even further. Horizontal, become horizontal, but you're literally bowing down to the earth, to the land. Humble yourself. Because the tree that does not humble itself does not bear fruit. And he was giving the example of a local indigenous tree that goes really tall but bears no fruit. And so more recently, the way some friends and I have been thinking about it is, how do we move from human to humility-centered design? What is humility-centered design? And truly, what is humility-centered? Not just like, oh, take your expert hat off and go to the community. No, go create. No. To use Vanessa Andreotti's framing, how do you step aside when you can't step forward? How do you try not to resolve, but to transform? And then applying this to social innovation work using, let's say, the housing lab, for example. So with SI Canada, I had the distinct pleasure to design the financialization of housing lab. And one of the first things that I was told as I stepped into that was, this is super complex. There's going to be stakeholders who don't want to be in the same room. There's going to be folks here who think housing is an asset and that's how it should be, and they make tons of money out of that. And there are folks that are going to be in this room who believe that housing is a human right and there's no way it can be commodified. And how are you going to get them to talk to each other? And my first instinct was, let's not talk. Let's breathe together. And so that's what we did. We did guided meditation over Zoom. And the guided meditation entailed asking, or in fact, reminding folks what home means to them. And I kid you not, in a room of 50 people, 6 people turned their videos off because they were crying a lot. And I was crying too, because, gosh, home. So when you think about home, it doesn't matter what you think about housing. Because home is where you're loved, and love unites. And so how do we, to quote Bell Hooks, have a love ethic? How does that relate with humility in design thinking? How does that change the way we do design thinking? There are lots of examples of it in Hunza. The indigenous communities were training women to make furniture, but it's a plug and play furniture. There's no nails, there's no metals. It's just pure wood. And for every tree they cut, they plant four more. And so what they've been doing is essentially reforesting the mountains for every piece of furniture they sell. And so what does it mean to design in relation with all our relations? And I feel like there's enough examples in communities that live that way that we can learn from. And people are catching on. Biomimicry is one such field within design thinking. Yeah, there you go. I see you. I see you. Biomimicry, regenerative design, all these principles, these really cool new emerging fields within design thinking, and also the intention, right? Love and humility. How do we embody those, and how then does that show up in our work?
Thank you. I'm gonna invite Mathura and Luke to see if you want to build on that in any way. And I think that for me, some of my experience in creating those folks coming together is that it's required to actually design those spaces that they're coming into. Or else we can actually have really negative impacts on folks. It can actually be, it can cause damage and hurt and pain, and the burden of the shift is often held by those who are already being negatively impacted. I've seen this happen time and time again. And so I wonder if, or you can talk about a different aspect of what Maryam was sharing, but I would like to invite Mathura, if either of you feel like commenting on that. Yeah.
Been really good company up here. Learning so much from all of you. Thank you for sharing. Feeling really inward right now. And I think my share will come from an inner place, and also more broadly a societal situation where, for me, I was brought up in a family and academic institutions where failure was seen as something to avoid and fear. The work that I think my personal practice and how I bring that into the work that Stopgap does is inviting people into spaces where we can give permission to ourselves to fail. And what that might look like is, there's ways that we can create barriers physically, but we can also create barriers through the language that we use. You might have had a situation where you didn't know what to say to someone perhaps that has a disability, someone that you've met or come across. And that might have brought up feelings that steered you away from that person, that group. Yeah, I see some heads nodding. I've definitely experienced that. And yeah, I have ableist and ignorant emotions that come from ableist and ignorant spaces in my body. What I've noticed for me and some of the gatherings that we curate, when there is that permission to fail, when there is that permission to say the wrong thing, coupled with a genuine intention to connect and understand a different lived experience, that brings people together and creates connection. It's hard work. Yeah, it's hard work.
Thank you. One of the things that come up for me with this is the need for the fear and the courage, right? The fear and the courage to sort of to move through that.
Thank you for the fodder, both of you. So we're just gonna keep. Just said thank you for the fodder, for the mind, heart, body, and spirit. One of the things that connects to what all of you have shared that I was kind of asked to speak about is the role of quote unquote brave spaces in this work and in moving through change and discomfort. And for me, it's important to note that bravery looks different for each person and within each context. We are all capable of accessing different levels of bravery, and our bravery has a different cost. And so when we ask people to show up in spaces and access bravery, understanding that we are asking a different thing of each person, and that part of being in reciprocal interaction is ensuring that we have thought of what bravery looks like. And actually, I would correct myself and say not thought of, we have asked each person, because what we assume someone needs to be brave is, and most likely is not what they need, because we don't have their lived experience, we don't have their context, we don't have their nervous systems. And I'm so glad that I'm not the first person to quote bell hooks today, but wouldn't be me if I didn't. Bell Hooks in her book, Talking Back, says, "It came to me right then that there are some folks for whom openness is not about the luxury of, quote, will I choose to share this or tell that, but rather, quote, will I survive? Will I make it through? And will I stay alive?" So that, in a sentence, shares the range of stakes that might be at play when we ask someone to be brave. And I think the work that we all have to do is figuring out how much of that is a trauma response, how much of the fear that we hold is a trauma response, and how much of that is an excuse. And where it is a trauma response, we are not deserving of our trauma, but we are responsible for healing it so that we do not pass it on. And I think that is where we can hold compassion for ourselves and others alongside accountability. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I'm going to pause there to pull out my phone because this is not something I know off the top of my head. But in that pause, take a breath, let it land. I think it's really important to define things because, again, everything means something different to each person. And I think that's where a lot of our conflict emerges, is because we think we're saying the same thing, but we're not. So when I say trauma, I'm going to read out 16 trauma exposure responses. And for the sake of really inviting this room into the conversation, whatever surface you have that you can bang on, feel free to bang on it if you recognize this trauma exposure response in yourself. And if you need to ground that in a moment, feel free to take the last week. Feeling helpless and hopeless. Be loud. This is a way of exerting our body's expression. Minimizing. Inability to embrace complexity. A sense that one can never do enough. a sense of persecution, guilt, grandiosity, or an inflated sense of importance related to one's work, fear, anger and cynicism, inability to empathize or numbing, hypervigilance, addictions, diminished creativity, chronic exhaustion or physical ailments, inability to listen or deliberate avoidance, dissociative moments. And again, I'm gonna scroll to find another piece that I wrote, but allow your body to really take in every time you tapped, but also every time you heard taps across the room. And now I'm going to read out to you the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And you can tap if you want, you don't have to if you don't want to. But I'm just going to invite you to look at the parallels. Perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, only one right way of doing things, paternalism, either or thinking, power hoarding, I'm the only one, fear of open conflict, individualism, progress is more, bigger, objectivity, and the right to comfort. And I just want us to sit with that the culture that we are swimming in is a trauma response. And while we can hold compassion for how we got here, we are also very much accountable for not passing it on.
Thank you. Oh, it is so humbling being with all of you. I want to let everyone know that we're so fortunate that our panelists after this are going to be actually sharing their time further beyond the panel. No? Oh, no, we don't. Okay. Sorry, okay, networking after the panel. And so how much time do we have? Okay, sorry, the design has changed, which is great, as it should. We're iterating and responding. Nice. And so that little timer that's telling me that it's time to wrap up is no longer accurate. Okay. And how long should that timer be for now? Just so we all know how to design the conversation moving forward. Just a little bit of information. Another 20 minutes. Fantastic. Well, I think I want you all to be able to keep talking, but I also really want to open it up to this group to see if there are some questions or comments that people would like to add. And maybe what we'll do, I'm wondering, would people like to actually, are things bursting out of you? Somebody put up a hand. Okay, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think it's for the recording.
Thank you. Hello? 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 Okay. Thank you so much for all the lived experiences that you have shared I have so much to say to each one of you, but I'll just mention one thing that in response to what Luke was talking about earlier about giving the permission to fail. I want to add to that a little bit to understand that we do live in a narrative right now of rugged individualism, like you mentioned about white supremacy, that we have this story that we have been told generations that if you work hard, you will succeed. And I think that in order to give ourselves permission to fail, we need to stop that narrative first. Because the flip side of the argument of if you work hard, you will succeed is that if you fail, it's your own fault. So I think that the permission to fail is important to have, but it is also important to get out of that rugged individualism that goes back to the systems thinking, is to provide that space to be barrier free so that people don't feel that they must work hard in order to succeed, because that would give us the permission to fail. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the shifts, right? To think that the theory of bootstrapping, which can create so much damage for ourselves and for our communities, the idea that we're all starting in the same spot. Thank you for that comment. Yeah. I wonder if there's some thoughts that people want to share in terms of the alternate design process and approaches. Yeah, in terms of how I just want to, to think about sort of how we do this differently. We know the linear way of, okay, let's do this and put this up on the wall and then go there and then go there and a miracle will ensue. We write these things down and ask that question and move from A to B to C. And I remember the tension of failure versus success that we felt in the lab, and having to, to actually have the courage to give up the linear and the sort of absolute outcomes. We still got the outcomes, so we're even better. But how do you build that into the design and your work and how you operate in the world to do things differently?
Well, that's a very complex question. One of the things I understand is to be present. And to be present is being on the land where these issues are occurring, understanding from not just the people, but also the impacts that people are having on the land, water, and the resources that surround them. It's actually quite spirit uplifting, I think you would say, in our way, of being one. Like my grandmothers and grandfathers always spoke of the is of life. And I always looked and I would say, why does the grass grow like that, Grandma? She said, because it is the way it's supposed to be. It's the original instructions given by creation in order for that to flourish, to grow. And it's those types of knowledge systems, really kind of looking at ecological, traditional knowledge systems, not just indigenous, but all human knowledge systems, and really becoming, again, centered and humbled, looking at the origins of that knowledge. Because I can guarantee you, everybody in this room, that knowledge that comes from your family originated from the land that your family came from. And that's what my grandparents would always say. If you need to understand who you are, you go to where your roots, where the seed of your existence began. That's where you become a humble human being, and that's when you walk in a good way and you use a good mind with a good heart. So a lot of the conversation associated to innovation and, looking at how do we actually progress as a common group, commonality, family, the sense of relationship, the interconnectedness. These are things that are extremely important when it comes to innovation. You can't be excluded. You need to have that level of inclusivity, that level of responsibility for each other and for everything that sustains us. So again, being aware, that level of cognizance when we are, approaching problems, and trying to find solutions. It's an all-encompassing solution that has to also include land, water, animals, trees, the elements, because they all have a part to play. And if we exclude one, we're not doing our due diligence as a collective, as a global citizen. So having that level of recognition and going back again to that seed of knowledge, returning back to the place of your origins actually holds a lot of value when it comes to advancing knowledge systems, advancing social innovation, advancing these concepts that, like I mentioned earlier with the two-row, they're not new. They've existed in nature for thousands, millions of years. It's how we interpret it and use it in a good way that's going to create that level of balance that's needed in a very unbalanced world we have right now. So that's the way I see it. That's the way when I do my work, I always ensure that I'm including the recognition of the land that we're on. And one other thing with innovation, it doesn't happen within four walls. And a lot of times when we are having conversation about solutions-based approaches, it's always under these walls. Go outside. That's where true innovation exists. It's always been there and it will always be there as long as we recognize and try to do our best to take care of it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to that?
I've got some serious homework to do. My family lineage is only a few generations deep here in Canada. The history beyond my great grandparents is fragmented and so unknown. Is that an experience for others in the room? Yeah. You can hand clap. I like that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Got some homework to do. My answer to this question is encapsulated with an acronym. BAF and BEF.
That's quite catchy.
Catchy, right? BAF and BEF. And this came out, it sort of manifested when I was putting together a talk, really thinking about what formula allowed us to experience the success that we've had over time. So I'll just quickly go through the different letters of this acronym, what they mean, where they came from. The first F is frustration. I talked about that earlier. Frustration, recognizing that in your own personal lives and your professional roles, the work that you do and where it lives in your body, and consciously working with that energy and diverting it into action. That's an experience that I had on the streets, talking to those business owners who were responding in the ways that I was sharing before. Frustration experienced by different groups of people who were being left out of spaces. Frustration. Awareness raising. So raising awareness about things that might not be on people's radar. Fun. So we've experienced some success by infusing our work with some levity. It's helped bring more people into the conversation. So the messaging that we put out there has a little dusting of humor, and there's a lightness to our work. The bright colors definitely help with that uplifting tone and make the ramps stand out amidst on a like a kind of drab concrete backdrop. Many of the communities that we work with, many hands on deck. So really building a community of people. And so the community includes, when it's, say, a corporate group looking to expand their DEI and justice work, bringing community organizations in on that. We've seen that happen with some of the housing work that I've been a part of with the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition, the AAC, where we're bringing builders and developers from a corporate background together in the room with organizations that are working in the community. Really important to build the community. Be disruptive. So in order to create change, we have to kind of stir the pot. And those ramps aren't allowed on city property because of building bylaw, municipal bylaws, like the encroachment bylaws that prevent sandwich boards and flower planters and cafe furniture and ramps. So being disruptive is an important element, and you know, trying to maintain a degree of safety within that element and that disruptive piece, or the actions we're taking in order to be disruptive. There's a non-violent component to that. Education is the E. Education and awareness raising kind of go hand in hand. E.
Is the last one an F?
F, P.
That's what I was gonna say that.
Yeah, I'll have to
Well, I
come
was
back to
gonna
that.
say that actually. I
I
was
messed
like,
up my own
yeah,
acronym,
yeah,
but the P, the final P is
Persistence?
putting people first.
People first. Nice.
Yeah.
It's almost the same thing.
Oh, I remembered the FAFMBEF free. So, you know, really offering a service or being of service to your social circles, your family, your professional lives, being of service, offering something of value at no cost. And then people first. That's kind of the formula that I stumbled upon when I'm really contemplating how we've made it this far.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Faf and Beth.
Beth.
So catchy.
I love it. I'm going to go off script a little bit because yesterday I was listening to some innovators who were talking a lot about how we live in a transition between two worlds, between our current world. And I see you, and I'm not going to say this properly because it does take me, as you all know, more than 48 hours to integrate information. But this sort of, we were invited to take some moments to think about what it felt like to be between modernity and whatever it is that comes next, that we're trying to design, that we're working to design. And I don't know, I just, have I sort of articulated that in any way? Yeah, around we were looking. And so when we're thinking about how we're going to work individually and together to move out of modernity into our next world, and the image, and I'm gonna, please tell me your project. I don't want to appropriate this beautiful information. Tell me the name of what you're working. Can you? Imaginal Transitions invited us to imagine the caterpillar in the soup before it transitions, it completely decomposes into this sort of soup, and before it actually in the chrysalis, before it transitions into the butterfly. And so as we are sort of in this dismantling, you know, in this destruction, as we are disrupting, I'd like to invite each of you to sort of just think a little bit about what you hope we will get rid of and what you hope we are bringing, and what it feels like to be in this in-between space.
I have, can you hear me? No.
No, I think it's just that they can't see you. Yeah. No. Yeah.
So I have a pathological need to tie together threads. And one of the threads that I want to tie together is the thread around land. And when we say in the work of equity, it's really important to consider context. Land is also context, and land as context is something that we need to remember. It's not new, it's not innovative, it's always been there. And it's a remembering, like putting together our members, again, all the members that we've been programmed to forget. And I talk a lot about the body, and for me, the body and the land are one and the same. We come from land, we go back to land. And in some ways, there are moments where access to land is a privilege, or access to land that we are from, where our ancestors are from and where our ancestors are buried, is a privilege. And in those moments when we don't have access to land in safe and accessible ways, remembering that our body is land, and also remembering that resistance is a natural response to oppression. So if your body is resisting something, taking a moment to start, and then many moments, possibly hours, possibly lifetimes, to understand why it's resisting and what parts of it have been oppressed and are in need of that compassion and that accountability. And in doing that, know that you are communing with the land as you are communing with your body, because they are one and the same. And the more we commune with our bodies, the more we are in community with our bodies, the more we will remember the land as the original teacher and the one that's always been here. And if there are moments when you're like, I don't know what the land is saying, considering that we're trying to remember and become fluent in a language that we have forgotten. So it may not be that the land is not speaking to us, but that we have not stopped for long enough to try and understand the language that we've forgotten. And again, it is forgotten because we know it.
And to say, not everyone's forgotten it. The teachers are still out there. Ananda Kumaraswamy says, they are still out there in the uttermost parts of the world. Where do we find the uttermost parts of the world? And they're in place, they're also in space. Their concepts of time and space are not, they're not distinct. It's one. In our spaces, you find that in global majority populations. Listening to Raya, I find it right next to me. In ecology, so now my PhD hat comes in. Sustainability management, that's what my PhD is in. In ecology, and once again, remembering, these are not new things. To control wildfires, we do controlled burns. This is something my people, other peoples, had been doing for generations. And then they got stopped because, oh, smog, you guys are causing smog. No, it wasn't them causing smog. It was carbon emissions from all these cars on the road, but who's going to talk about that? But in resistance, there is also controlled violence. There are controlled burns, controlled fires. Fires that make sure that there aren't greater fires. Please light those fires. And recognize when you see them around you. Name them. Protect them.
So going back to the magic bag down here. So in our ways of knowing and being, we recognize the agency and autonomy of the world around us, that it has a voice. It is a decision maker along with us. And it also gives us the tools of democracy based on natural law. Nature has its own ways of knowing and being, and it's our responsibility as a collective, as again, a community, to come together and recognize these things in a way that also is representative of the ambassadors of nature. So earlier I showed you the Gaswanta, the two-row. Does anybody know what this one is? Yeah, the dish with one spoon, the land that we're all sitting on right now. Dish with one spoon. The whole idea was that it was for nations to come together in recognition of the sustainability of food on this land. And food, it was our economy. It was what defined us. It's what binded us together. It's what created nations. And it was all captured in a wampum belt. So when we talk about democracy, we always kind of refer to the pen, the mighty ink on paper. Well, I can tell you that there's also other ways of recognition of our laws. This is law, literally natural law. The original dish with one spoon was made from shells, from beads, from the East Coast. Those shells represent water, the spirit of water, the agency and autonomy of water. The bindings come from the land. They come from elm that's been twisted, or other forms of different types of terrestrial materials bound together. A family, a connection, interconnection, unity, common unity. All of these things, are what define who we are and what we do here in the dish with one spoon. The Great Lakes, extremely valuable. They define our identity as people here in Canada and the United States. All the First Nation people, all peoples have a relationship. So regardless if you don't know where your ancestry comes from, you're home. This is home for everyone here. We need to take care of our home. We need to get our house in order. That's what my grandmother would say. Get your house in order. So, little stern. But in order to understand that commonality, and it's the basics of the human connection. Anybody know what this one is? No? It's the friendship belt. Our diplomacy was based on friendship, the simplicity and the beauty of friendship. These two boxes represent two nations, the single white line, the connection, the interconnection, the coming together of two distinct peoples, but also on a river of life together. And that's the whole idea when it comes to thinking about the future. We have concepts like 7 generations. We're already thinking 7 generations ahead to ensure that we sustain what we have now, the goodness of the world, the goodness of creation, the goodness of humanity, so that our great plus grandchildren will be able to experience what we get to experience now, and so that they're not left out, left behind. So we're always cognizant, always aware, always ensuring that what we do for the right and benefit of all, human and non-human. And that's one of the things that, again, is instilled in the way that we see, and by way of saying we, Haudenosaunee people, all Anishinaabe people, all Indigenous peoples, as far as I'm aware, share that common concept of connection, interconnection, love, caring, sharing, sustainability. These are the things that I really truly believe are paramount to innovation moving forward, and really connecting with people. And not just when I was a kid, again, kind of aging myself, 80s, every person in my community would wave as you were walking by. How many times in the day when you're walking through downtown Toronto do you actually have people look at you and wave, or say, how are you today? And be genuine with it. That's what we need to get back to. It's that human relationship. And that's what I really truly believe is, you know, the steps that we need to take in order to really create that future that we're all yearning for, but we don't clearly understand just yet.
Thank you. I think we're going to make that our last comment. Thank you. Thank you so much. But I'm going to have us just sit for a moment before, you know, Bambip, land, spirit, heart. Rai, you said it so beautifully in terms of what we need to get back to and to use all of these strengths to get there. I'm going to just invite my colleague Gwen. I'm going to put her on the spot. We just have a gift of tobacco for each of you to thank you for being here. And we had some friends of mine kept us in ceremony recently when we were on a trip. And it was such a healing piece of that ceremony of that trip was to be in ceremony and tobacco. And so with respect, we want to offer you this, keep you on your way. I think we've learned a lot today. I've learned a lot. I hope you've all learned a lot about what it's going to take to actually not just incorporate equity and diversity, accessibility, inclusion into systemic design, but how we have to interrupt our current systems to be able to achieve that. I'm actually going to flip the title of this panel on its head. Please join me in thanking our panelists for today.